Hey, David here. We're back again today. Been doing my tour of my library Wednesdays at 4 p.m., which I plan on keeping that regular time program. Um, but I wanted to finish up my Jewish books so that next week during Hanukkah, I will
Wanted to finish up my Jewish
officially
books.
finish the Jewish section of my library with the more religious books. I'll plan on doing Hasidus and Kabbalah and Torah texts, which should be a good one, interesting one. And so looking forward to that. So I have a few more shelves today that I put together with Jewish history, but I have some on like we'll call Jewish culture, synagogues, synagogue architecture. So collection, picture, history books of synagogues and synagogue architecture. My field of study, civil engineering. I kind of always thought like when I went to university, I wanted to study construction and like God willing, one day maybe we'll build the third temple. So I went into construction and civil engineering, and I had a big interest in synagogue architecture, although I haven't been involved in when I was in Borough Park and Bubba used to be involved with the construction, teaching Hasidic kids construction, the sukkah. Um, the downtown synagogue's now under construction, but I don't have anything to do with that. But one of my fields of interest, so I have a whole bunch of books, a full shelf, a lot of big books, picture books, very interesting, and Israel-Palestine, and also a collection of big books like history, various books that like large table books, pictures. A lot of them I'd bought in Eichler's when I lived in Borough Park, more expensive books. A lot of them are pretty interesting. Most of them history related, and then the start of some of my like Torah books, although they're more history or books about Torah than actual texts. So hopefully, finish the library. Yesterday's program went over 3 hours, and thank God, pretty good viewership. And the series in general has been getting good viewership, so I appreciate that. So I figure I'd just pound through my Jewish books, put it out there. It's good for my own head, my own understanding, clarifying my own kind of identity crisis, kind of also my Jewish identity crisis. I've talked with Charles Moskowitz, like, God forbid, E. Michael Jones said, you can't take a Protestant approach to Judaism. So, basically, I'm a practicing Jew. I consider myself a Jew. I do the Jewish prayers. I keep Sabbath, but I'm not really part of any community, which Judaism's a communal relationship. And then, there's Jewish leadership and there's rabbis. And went over the biography and, the question of the sages, the Orthodox approach. And I had put in, hey, Mark, thanks for tuning in. Yeah, I did part one yesterday. You could, join in. It's not necessarily continuing. I'm really just showing my book so that there's not necessarily too many themes, but just in the introduction, I mentioned I put the demiurge. I'm going to show Philo today that Philo had considered the god Hashem, the god of the Hebrew prophets, as the demiurge. And I'd mentioned that in the books that changed my life and the great Masters of Wisdom by J.G. Bennett in the Gurdjieff School that had a chapter. The first chapter started with the demiurge, and that really kind of changed my view on the world. But Philo considers the God of the Hebrew prophets as the representative force of the demiurge. There were some of the ancient philosophers that considered the Jewish people the demiurge. And when I get into the Kabbalah, you will see some of the text and ideas about this. But this concept is that the Jewish people themselves function as an agent of the demiurge, and that does not necessitate a person being Orthodox. And like all Jews, whether good or bad, religious or irreligious, atheistic or believers, have a role as a functioner of the demiurge. And from the Judaic concept that Kabbalistically refers to the breaking of the vessels, the scattering of the Jews, and the ingathering. And there's a relation to Torah and mitzvos, but generally, the Jews serve this function as the force propelling the world forward in terms of progress. And so it's interesting to look at Jewish history through that lens. Almost no of the books, you could say almost all books written by Jewish authors have somewhat of that feel, that there's an intrinsic understanding of Jews to feel like we are part of the demiurge. And, that would mean that, more secular terms, we're on the right side of history, that, we're integral in the advancement of, society, Western society, that, we cause certain things to happen, and, enlightened, the Mosaic of expression, priest to nations, the light to the world, repair the world. And you could look at all of those philosophically in the Greek terms as the demiurge, that to repair the world, light upon the nations, priest to nations, are all various forms of the demiurge, and that Jews play this role as some sort of force that propels the world forward in progress, and that would be good or bad from the esoteric Hasidic Kabbalistic perspective, that all Jews, whether they're good or bad Jews, religious or irreligious, have this function with progress. So it's an interesting thing to note in looking at these Jewish history books. And I showed a lot of random Jewish history, the Jews of India, the Jews of Japan, the Jews of China, the Jews of Africa, worldwide Jewry. Most of my books were on American Jewish history. And I'm going to show more books today on American Jewish history, specifically the Jewish role in culture, and a lot of interesting books there. I'm also going to have my collection of books on Israel-Palestine, and some of those are more modern history, Zionism, and the current state of Israel, and also ancient history, Second Temple, archaeology, and some of my bigger history books, also pretty interesting like that. So I think I'm going to start off with my big books, but what I'm going to do a niggin today. So I'm going to try to get more into my Judaism, try to find my Jewish voice. So, even I would like to practice Judaism together with the community. It's unclear what Jewish community I would be part of. You can just pick one and mention, okay, I'm only a half Jew, or there's Jewish organization, leadership, ways that the Jews generally pick their leadership or form communities. So, how I would fit into a Jewish community is very difficult and part of my identity crisis. But certainly I studied Judaism the majority of my adult life. I went to top schools in Jerusalem. I studied under famous rabbis, and I've been promoting actively Judaism really my whole adult life. That's why I created my YouTube page, starting with the downtown synagogue, Chabad, Jewish community at large, really anyone who was willing to work together with me. Basically, anyone in the Jewish community from any sort to Chabad, Orthodox, liberal, who has asked for my help, I've said yes. And, I love Judaism. I love being active in the Jewish community, but I more love Torah. I love the wisdom and, all sorts. And I have a special love of Jewish history, but all sorts of books. So exciting to share some more books. So why don't I sing a niggin today? I didn't do that the last few times, but I'm going to try to kick off a new Jewish series. So, next week I'm going to finish my Jewish book of Hanukkah, and then I'm going to continue the tour of my library after Hanukkah for maybe even another 2 months, because I have quite a few different sections, Christian books, African, Black American books, consciousness, psychology, linguistics, Gurdjieff, history, politics, business, engineering. Obviously, I could, possibly even another 2 months, I would be able to continue my book series, and then I want to start more work on the multiple truth hypothesis, specifically consciousness. That maybe I'll try to do a weekly stream, in addition to Week in Review, where I'll be covering more advanced topics in consciousness, in the multiple truth hypothesis, and also try to do a weekly stream on Judaism. So, God willing, have the strength to do that. So let me sing a niggin. So it's not Thursday night yet, but Shabbos is coming. So this was always one of my more favorite tunes, Nagunim. It's an old Karlin Stolen Chabad tune. Kretschnoff, in Amunis Yisrael, Rabbi Wilson's nephew, Spitzer, used to sing the song to the words of Yo Exoff, the Aaron Karliner, but it was a wordless tune that in Carlin, I think when they use it, they use it to Yori Bun or just wordless. In Chabad, it's also a known tune, a few 100-year-old Russian tune that has a very high part. And I used to have more melodies in my head. So randomly over the last few years, I less often have melodies in my head. And maybe as I'm getting older, or we'll talk, I did the stream on Jewish music. So let me chant a niggin, and then I'm going to get started with my books. Ya ma 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 ya 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 ma ya ma 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 ya 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 ma oh ya 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 ma. So this is like I mentioned in my Hasidic Nagunim, a 4-part tune that mirrors the name of God. That would be the Yud Hey Vav Hey, which would be 1 2 3 2. That is a introductory part, the chorus, then a high part that mirrors the first part, and then return to the second part that would be a meditation on God's name. So the first part, and then there'll be the chorus that will be repeated the second and fourth time after the high part. Ya ma 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 ya 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 yo 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 ma ya ma 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 ya yo yo ya oh ya ma ma ya 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 da 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 na 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 ya ya yo 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 oh yeah, yeah, 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 oh yeah, mama, da da da. Ya mama ma ya 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 mama ya 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 ma ya mama 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 ya 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 ma ya mama 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 ya 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 oh ya ma na 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 da 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 ya mama ya 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 oh ya ya oh ya ya oh ya ya ma oh ya ya oh ya ya oh ya ya mama oh ya mama. So I'll do the last part, the of the words to coax off the Hashabos, Neumann, and Shumos. And actually, I like the Vishnitz tune to it, but to the words, to the last part, Hashabos, Neumann, and Shumos, Veyashvi, Oina Garukos, Leis Aden, the Avusecha, Yerusecha. That Shabbos is the pleasure of the soul. The seventh day is a the supreme pleasure of the soul, the adain to take pleasure in the love of God and the fear of God. Shabbos Kodesh, the holy Shabbos, Nafshi Choilas Avusecha, same words in Yedid Nefesh, Nafshi Choilas Avusecha, my body pains, is sick from love of God. Shabbos Kodesh, B'tzel Kenefecha, from the shadow of God's glory. B'tzel Yisrael, Kabbalistic words I can't hard even ready to translate, but the tune, and Kreshnov, they used to sing the tune to the words. That's where I first heard it. In Karlinstone or Chabad, they're known tunes, although they're very rarely sung. Although, if you speak to an older Chabad chassid or a Chabad chassid in the known or a Karliner chassid in the known, they would know this tune. So let me just do the Vishnitz tune real quick to this word, because just to put myself into the proper mindset. So you'll see if I get some viewers to do this. Just try to set my own pace, because I studied Judaism as a believer, and chanting is a very important part of that. Ha-Shabbos Noyam Hashumais V'yashvi Oineg Urichos Le'edein Avuseichu Le'avuseichu Yeruseichu Shabbos Kodesh Nafshi Koilas Avuseichu Shabbos Kodesh Nefushois Yisrael B'tzel Kenufeichu Yeksurin Yedei Shem V'Sechu. So that's a famous Vishnitz tune. Tolsam Yitzchak Rebbe used to also sing that tune. The Stechina Rebbe, Rabbi Wolfson's son-in-law, used to sing that tune every week. And then in Emunas Row, they would sing the tune that I first did to those words. Oy vei Shabbos noyam. Okay, so let me just do to the books, hemorrhage all my viewers. If anyone's going to tune in, but try to set the tune. So let me get to the books. I pulled them off the shelf earlier, and I largely picked these out as bigger books. So I took these books off the shelf to do the larger books first, and a lot of these books. So this book is actually my mom's. I'm going to give this back to my mom. The Jews, a Treasury of Art and Literature. Big book that is a little bit of a history and pictures of the role of Jews in literature and pictures of art. So this is actually my mother's book. I'm going to put this to the side to give it back to my mother. Here is The World That Was America, 1940 to 1945, transmitting the Torah legacy to America. So I had mentioned, and this is published by the Shar Press, Orthodox publisher. You could say a Masorah publication. It might be a division of Art Scroll event. And you say, I paid a lot of money. This was like $50 at Eichler's years ago. And as I mentioned, in terms of Haredi and the sages, you don't really have any sages in America till after World War II. The sages generally recommended against coming to America. So you had a few Orthodox rabbis, but they weren't really sages. That maybe they learned a little bit, made some rulings, tried to keep kosher and Sabbath, but they weren't really sages. So the sages get to America during World War II as refugees, and after. You mentioned like Rav Moshe Feinstein and Aaron Cutler, most of the Hasidic Rebbes, Kloisenberg Rebbe, the Bubov Rebbe, Satmar Rebbe, all come to America as refugees. But you had the foundation of Orthodoxy in America before that, where you had Orthodox Jews trying their best to get their start. You had some yeshivas there set up, Eitz Chaim Yeshiva, the beginnings of Yeshiva University, the Orthodox Union, the Young Israel Movement, Agudas Yisrael, and a whole bunch of rabbis that tried their best, and there was even a handful of yeshivas that had their starting before the war, but generally the sages arrived after the Holocaust, after World War II, but they're able to go straight into yeshivas. That they're Torah Vodaas and a handful of yeshivas. There were already institutes of learning set up in America. So after World War II, the sages were able to teach Torah. I'd say generally there weren't any sages in America till after World War II, but there was orthodoxy, and even the early, like the first Spartan that came to America, going back before America started, Torah Synagogue, even slave traders, you could so to say were Orthodox. Maybe they kept Shabbos and they tried to keep Halacha, but they weren't Talmidei Chachamim. They didn't know how to learn. They weren't sages. They were disconnected in many ways from the larger yeshiva network. So there's a good book about the formation of Jewry, Orthodox Jewry in America, laying the groundwork before the war. Here's another similar book, Daring to Dream: Profiles in the Growth of the American Torah Community. This is actually published by the Agudas Yisrael. So, Agudas Yisrael in Israel is part of United Torah Judaism. In America, as I mentioned, Rabbi Zwiebel, who's son in Israel, Sender Zwiebel, I was friends with, decades ago, and he was headed for a period of time by the Munkacher Rebbe, and gives a series of notable people, Orthodox Jews, some rabbis that tried their best to be Orthodox, helped build up the Orthodox community, but in the pre-Sage era, and a lot of these people are getting their commands from Europe, and question why did they come to America, even when generally the rabbis recommended against coming to America. So they weren't really that Orthodox. Like for America, they were Orthodox, and then I said after the war that becomes the backbone for the sages to come to America and build up the yeshiva community, like Aaron Cutler building up Lakewood, Rav Moshe Feinstein in Tiferes Mesivta, MTJ in the Lower East Side, Torah Vodaas, and almost all the yeshivas get relocated and keep the name of their European, tells all of the yeshivas in America basically today keep the name from where they came from in Europe, and most of their settlement comes after the war. But there's a handful of books of notable people that did their best to try to be frum, maintain a frum life, do a little bit of Torah learning, try to keep kosher, and little things. So here's the Jewish experience: 2,000 years, a collection of significant events. Rabbi Zakane, also the Shar Press, and I think the Shar Press. ArtScroll has a number of various publications that that they use when don't want to use the ArtScroll name. So this may be Art Scroll, or it may be something else. So just random historical events, 2,000 years of Jewish experience. Another interesting book. All these books I got at Eichler, Great Jewish Men, Slater and Slater, and this has mostly non-sages, non-rabbis. So this list almost has no rabbis. So general, like I was mentioning, the Jews as the demiurge. So great Jewish men who had accomplishments in the secular realm. This was a pretty good book. I remember reading this. I think I even read it twice. Jerusalem, Footsteps Through Time, Aaron Horowitz. So this is 10 Torah study tours of the Old City. And this is a Feldheim book, and it has pictures and archaeology of actually walking tours that you could go through in the Old City and see historical sites in the Old City of Jerusalem. So this was a pretty interesting book. This one also, Aleppo, City of Scrolls. This Art Scroll Sephardic Heritage, Rabbi Sutton. And so Aleppo was a town mentioned already in the prophets, and up until I think World War II had the largest Syrian Jewish community, and I think sometime after World War II there was an uprising, and the Jews were expelled, and the synagogue was destroyed. And I think the oldest Torah scroll that is known, which may be like 1,300 years old, was saved from Aleppo, but God forbid a lot of things were destroyed in Aleppo. But Aleppo in Syria had been a major center of Jewry from the days of the prophets till recently. Now, with all the politics in Syria, Ace, really thanks for tuning in. That Art Scroll, interesting book. So these are also pretty interesting books, charting the Masorah creation through the Goanim. And, so as I mentioned, if you're a believer, we have an unbroken chain from creation till the rabbis today. So in Pirkei Avos it says 10 generations from Adam to Noah, 10 generations from Noah to Abraham, 10 generations from Abraham to Moses. And I think another 10 generations from Moses to David. And then if you're looking from David through the rabbis today, that so it's charting the Masorah, and you have the era of the early Achronim. So volume 3, I think maybe I don't have volume 2, or if I have volume 2 somewhere also. So just the chronological charts, some maps of connection of the major sages of the generations from biblical times till this would be about the 1800s. I've showed these books before, I think, when I did the Holocaust books. Here you have The World That Was Poland. And these are series from like the Hebrew Academy of Cleveland, The World That Was Hungary and Romania, and The World That Was Lithuania. So just shows kind of rabbis and Jewish communities across Eastern Europe that were destroyed. World War II has some maps, stories of rabbis, histories of communities, and God forbid some of the destruction that happened World War II. Here, these are together because they're just large. So, A Precious Legacy, Judaic Treasures from the Czechoslovakia State Collections. So I guess Czechoslovakia, I'm not sure, some of these might have been recovered from World War II, or just historical museum pieces of art in Judaica through the years that are part of the Czechoslovakia State Museum. So, some interesting books. Avi Ben Moshe, Keep the World, Hungary and Romania. So, okay, you're pounding through. Some of these books I read 20 years ago that, like the last time I picked up and looked at these books was like 20 years ago. I got them when I was first in yeshiva, and, it was more learning Talmud and other stuff, and I wanted to know more. And this is, even before the internet age, when, like I went to Eichler's in Borough Park and I spent my hard-earned money. Like I didn't have much money. I didn't have an apartment. I hardly had food. It was very thin. And I spent all my money on books. And a lot of these books were really expensive. Here is an interesting book. This is in Yiddish, actually. And it's the 150th year anniversary of Reb Meir Balanes, the Koilel. Says a history of the formation of the organization of Reb Meir Balanes, that I think founded by the Chassam Sofer, and was founded in Europe to fund Koilel rabbinic education in Israel. And a lot of pictures. You can see a lot of the Gedolim and rabbis. If you're in, it's a major charity that it's mentioned in the Talmud to give a little money to in the honor of Reb Meir Baal Hanes, or Meir, mentioned in the Talmud. One of the rabbinic personalities in a lot of the Mishnah. I think the Stam Mishnah is Reb Meir. Someone just says like the Mishnah speaks without listening to rabbi. It's usually thought to be Reb Meir. So they have Koilel Shomrei Hachamos. And a lot of these have these charity boxes that are Meir Baal Hanes. And like sometimes if you lose a lost object, you say you give a little bit of charity in the honor of Reb Meir Baal Hanes. And the money goes to fund Torah education in Israel, and it's backed by almost all the major sages, Rosh Hashiva, major rabbis, synagogue rabbis, rebbes, and they usually have yearly dinners. Borough Park, Flatbush, Williamsburg, Muncie, Israel, London, major organizations. So this was their 150th anniversary, maybe like 10 years ago, and a nice book, a lot of pictures. I paid $80 for this book at Eichler's. I'm not sure if it's maybe still expensive out of print. Heller, I think it's a YU guy, Printing the Talmud, the history of the earliest printed editions of the Talmud. So this is a very interesting book that covers the printing of the Talmud. So from the earliest known transcripts that we have, the earliest in existence copies of the Talmud that we have, and to the printing press, the Bamberg Talmud, the Cicino Talmud, and all these various things. So it's a very, very interesting book, Printing the Talmud. I'm sure the publisher here. This is an interesting book. My grandfathers actually mentioned this, The Jews of Chicago, from shtetl to suburb. So a nice history from the first Jews coming to Chicago till the suburbs, that my mother's family, my grandfather's grandfather, Rabbi Bamberger, came to Chicago in 1890, he was in New York for a period of years at the Workmen's Circle, was a graduate of the Breslau Rabbinic Academy, and then got a job with the Workmen's Circle, and then was brought to Chicago to head the Workmen's School from the Workmen's Circle that trained Jews in a craft and trade. And my grandfather joined the Army of World War II and my mother was raised in Glencoe in the suburbs. So, the history of Chicago, I got this to learn my family history. And actually, my grandfather's mentioned, as said in this book, a nice, big picture, long history of the Jews of Chicago. Says that these books are organized just because they're large. So the President of the United States and the Jews, Dallin and Kolish. This is just president by president, the relationship between the president and the Jews. So it's like, George Washington's letter to the Jewish community and various things that, the history of all the presidents and their relationship to the Jewish community. This was an interesting book. I bought it online. It was also kind of expensive. Western Jews in India from the 15th century to present. So I think this was written by Kenneth Robin Tokayer. I forget the nature, but it has a lot of graphics and the long history. Cochin, the earliest recording of the Jews. The disputed long origins. The claim. Some claim they're Jews going back 2,000 years. Or the records, even in Cochin, that say the longest in use synagogue in the world. I think it's still in Cochin. That although it's hardly used anymore, and there's various other places. So this book actually, is more about Jews from the West going there. So you have Caspar da Gama. So people in America probably know Vasco da Gama, who mapped and came to the Americas, South America, and his son Gaspar da Gama traveled around Africa to India, and he had Jewish translators with him, although most of them were converts to Christianity, but they were ethnically Jewish. This would have been around the time of the Inquisition, and when they got to Cochin and Jews and the bringing of the first Sefer Torah. So I believe from what this book said that in Cochin, it was unclear if they had a Sefer Torah, and so back 500 years ago, they brought a Sefer Torah from Europe, and then there was a lot of Jews who were involved in Britain. There were the Sassoons coming from Iraq, and various issues. So a nice history book, Western Jews in India. I have another book I'll show soon on India. The Holocaust Museum in Washington. So I think I showed in my architecture, just the book on the architecture of the Holocaust Museum. But this is a picture book of the exhibit, the making of the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., the United States Holocaust Museum. This was the other book I was thinking when I showed the book of the walking tours. When Heaven Touches Earth, Jewish Life in Jerusalem from Medieval Times to Present, by Guardian Press. This is a very good book that covers 1,000-year history of Jerusalem, from the lowest of times when there was hardly any Jews through the modern times and the revival into present day post Zionism, and covers building, archaeology, construction, rabbis, sages. So I'm pretty sure I even read this book twice. David Rassoff, Where Heaven Touches Earth, Jewish Life in Jerusalem from Medieval Times to the Present. The Wine Route of Israel, Goldfisher and Sachs, just about more modern. Israel's now has became known for wine, high quality wine. Obviously they grew grapes in Israel in ancient times. Always had grapes and wine as a ritual. One of the 7 types of fruit or grains that has a special blessing after. But in the last few years, they have came up with ways to grow quite high quality wine in Israel. So this goes over some of the the modern day famous wineries. Wine Route of Israel, Goldfisher and Sachs. Here also, this book was pretty expensive, but I wanted to know Bombay, Exploring the Jewish Urban Heritage. And this is mostly the Sassoons, who are Iraqi Jews in business and work together with the British. And you have the hospital where Gandhi stayed, in the schools, in some of the synagogues. But there's notable architecture and building related to the Jewish community. It said Gandhi himself, when he was sick, went to the Sassoon Hospital. A lot of these structures still exist. I remember I took this to ISKCON, the Hare Krishna temple, and was showing it to some Indians. They were familiar with it. And Bombay, I guess now maybe it's called Calcutta. There was the old English name, and one of the biggest cities in the world. I think has 20 plus million people now, but has a Jewish history going back hundreds of years. There are some possibly indigenous Jews, Indian Jews, and then you also have the Iraqi Jewish community that comes during hardships, period a few hundred years ago in Iraq. And the Sassoons moved to China, which I had showed yesterday, the Jews of China book. So this has a lot of pictures, a lot of maps. This is a pretty cool book. Shal Sapir, Bombay, Exploring the Jewish Urban Heritage. This was a really good book, especially because I'd been to lots of these places and actually went on a multiple day tour group with Rabbi Wolfson. And when I was in Israel, and he used to come for the summers and go to Meron. And the first year I was there, Rabbi Wolfson and a group, they went and prayed at a bunch of tunes, and then it was the Or Sameach and their trips, or various times. So Jewish holy sites and tombs in Eretz Yisrael, going over a lot of the famous rabbis and where they're buried, pictures, the history of the site. There's also like the Arizal. People know the history, where many of the graves were unknown who was in them, and the Arizal, through divine providence, claimed to know who was in the tomb, and gave the name of the sages in the tombs, although it was unclear. So some of this is in dispute with modern historians, like Rabbi Shimon Tzaddik in Jerusalem. And a lot of Israeli scholars claim that it's not even Jewish; it's an Arab person buried there. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that's also in dispute with modern Israeli secular scholars. Some of the tombs that say, are these historic sages or prophets actually buried there? So this book covers a little bit of the dispute in the history, but an overview of Israel and the holy sites, and how far back we know that it was recognized of these people. So if you're in Sfat or various places, we have marked burials. So I was mentioning like Reb Meir Baal HaNes, Hillel, I think is buried near Meron. But tens of the rabbis in the Talmud, we have their graves marked. And then from the time in Sfat, it said the Arizal is the main sage that went around Israel, declaring that certain sites were the graves of previous rabbis, including Meron and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but a lot of them, and it said it's actually a dispute among modern day secular Israeli scholars, the accuracy of some of this. But this was a very interesting book, Jewish Holy Sites and Tombs in Eretz Yisrael, Menachem Mickelson, Moshe Milner, Yehuda Solomon. I actually recognized even some people from the pictures in them, a lot of good pictures. A Truth Bites. Thanks for tuning in. This is also an interesting book, Diaspora in the Lost Tribes of Israel, that has pictures and of smaller Jewish communities around the world in the East, Far East Africa, Caucasus Mountains, and other areas. So put these back on the shelf. Okay, so now I'm going to do my books on Israel. That is some Israeli history from modern day to ancient times, including your modern geopolitics. So I'm going to try to do these by size, just so it'll be easier to put back on my shelf. Okay, so I was showing this book yesterday. So all these books are, some of them are ancient, Second Temple, but a lot of them are in modern state of Israel and Israel-Palestinian conflict. So here's Israel's Secret Wars: A History of Israel's Intelligence Service by Ian Black and Benny Morris, this is the origins pre-state of Israel through the Intifada and history of Israel's intelligence service, and so these are like the secret wars, operations related to the wars. A. Wes Curry again. Yeah, I think I remember your email from Adam Green. So you're a little hard to comprehend. So it looks like you're kind of like preaching and trying to say something at the same time. So if you're trying to say something, just say it. Like if you have something to preach, maybe do that separate, because it makes it hard to understand if you're trying to forward, if you're trying to say something to me versus if you're trying to like forward your own preaching. So here, Josephus. So this has the new complete works, which includes the history of Israel and the Jewish-Roman wars. So I'm not going to talk much about Josephus and important books, specifically for secular historians. In Amunis Yisrael, they had Josephus Hebrew, and somewhat disputed whether they should have in the Oitzer Tzorim, the library, Josephus. But I remember I indexed the library in Amunis Yisrael, and they had a copy of Josephus. People used to come in and check Josephus, and there are also certain people that were anti-Josephus, but one of the more well-known Jewish histories. So here's the complete works of from Kregel, and here also Philo, the complete works of Philo, complete and on a bridge. So Philo from Alexandria was the representative of the Jews to Caligula before the destruction of the Second Temple. I was mentioning the Demiurge and a lot of like the esoteric Christianity. There's questions of its origins, some of the origins of Kabbalah and mysticism. So important reading among Haredi Orthodox Jews is not considered part of the tradition. Among scholars, it's one of the better known ancient works. Also Christians, a lot of speculations, the origins of Christianity, but said Philo is the representative of the Jewish people. The main community at the time was in Alexandria, Egypt, and represented the Jews to Caligula. And I mentioned the concept of the Demiurge. So Sir Simon Sebag Montefiore, his book on Jerusalem. My father actually gave me this book as a present like a decade ago. Very good book, great long-term history from ancient times till today of Jerusalem. Descendant of the famous Montefiore, British Sparty wealthy family that gave a lot of money to fund Zionism, some of the early construction projects in Israel. So great, multi-generational history of Jerusalem. Here's a recent book, The Truth. Thanks for showing up. And Gary Nelson, Israel Denial, Anti-Zionism, Anti-Semitism, the Faculty Campaign Against the Jewish State. So this is a pro-Zionist book, covering the current state of BDS movements and anti-Israel sentiment on college campuses. Indiana University Press, where the study for anti-Semitism is located. So here, another Benny Morris book. Benny Morris, somewhat controversial, but one of the better known Israeli historians, and say among Zionists, he's considered anti-Zionist or even anti-Israel. Among Palestinians, like, he's not quite pro-Palestinian, but he tries to be more neutral in his history, without morally taking the side of Israel. And he talks a lot about God forbid, some of the possible war crimes or atrocities committed by Israel, enough so that a lot of Israelis are Zionist. Call him like a self-hating Jew, but not quite where a lot of Palestinians don't think he goes far enough. So here's Benny Morris, The Birth of the Palestinian Refugee Problem Revisited. So these are important topics for understanding what's going on in Israel now, and the Nakba and these various resolutions in the UN, what happened in the war in 47, how did we get all these Palestinian refugees. So it said, this Cambridge Press, Benny Morris is one of the better known, well-respected Israeli historians, but so his revision in the topic in itself is extremely controversial. Max Blumenfeld, Goliath, Life and Loathing in Greater Israel. So Max Blumenfeld, pretty popular figure. I think he's the son of the founder of the Clinton Foundation, advisor to the Clinton, Sidney Blumenfeld. And to Zionist, he's considered like an anti-Semite, anti-Israel activist. He's a Jewish American kid who went to Israel and was not happy with the treatment of Palestinians, and he has alternative media now. In the last few years, he hasn't focused much on Israel. He was in South America, and now he talks a lot about Ukraine, but I think this was one of his first major works, Goliath. Max Blumenfeld, kind of revealing some of the dark side of the Israeli government, what's happening to Palestinians, God forbid. Famous book, Startup Nation, Dan Senor and Shaul Singer, New York Times bestseller. Dan Senor actually came to the JCC and headlined the Jewish Book Fair, and this very well-known book about the startup economy, and kind of like a pro-IDF army book about how the nature of Israel and military service feeds into the capitalistic nature of Israel and the startup economy. Probably, maybe even the most popular, well-known book written on Israel, period. And then Dan Senor, I'm not sure if he went to head, but he was a senior in the Council of Foreign Relations, and then ended up as an advisor to Mitt Romney for the presidential campaign against Obama, which he lost. And I think Dan Senor kind of fell out of public view after the loss of Mitt Romney. But for a period of time, I'd say this is probably one of the most popular, well-known books about modern Israel, Startup Nation, Dan Senor. This is a good book. I bought this at Barnes & Noble, The Holy Land Guide to Archaeological Sites and Historical Monuments. So just a generic Barnes & Noble book on archaeological and historical sites in Israel. So I like these books. I had the bigger picture books. Here, Crossing Mandelbaum Gate, Coming of Age Between Arabs and Israelis, 1956 to 78, Carrie Bird. So more, history, Israel-Palestine conflict and the wars, and re-examining, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Israel National Security by Freilich, Oxford book, dealing for a defense perspective, a military perspective of how do you defend Israel? What are the major security issues? Military guide of Israeli military strategy, Israel National Security by Freilich. Here, a history of the Arab-Israeli conflict. I took a course at University of Michigan. This may have been the textbook that they used at the course that I took. And I could see the teacher was going to fail me. I had to drop the course because the teacher just did not like me, even though I was really the only one in the class who knew anything about the subject beforehand. I ended up dropping the course because I just saw the teacher didn't like me, was probably going to fail me. But I think this was the textbook they used at University of Michigan, a history of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Here's the state of the Middle East, an atlas of conflict and resolution. So this is not just Israel, but has pictures and maps about the various conflicts going on across the Middle East. Wars, Dan Smith. So this section I have generic books on Middle East conflict also. I have an Arab section, with the Islamic section. But if it includes Israel, if it talks about conflict in the Middle East or wars and includes Israel, I usually have it together with my Israel books. And if it doesn't have Israel but has other places, I have it together with my Muslim books. Arabs and Israelis, conflict and peacemakers in the Middle East. And this is also a college textbook that was co-authored by Israelis and Palestinians on the Arab-Israeli conflict. And so this book was designed for university courses that had co-authors of Arabs and Israelis. The 100 Years' War on Palestine, a history of settler colonialism and resistance by Rashid Khalidi. So I think do I have this autographed? Yes, so Rashid Khalidi came to the Arab Museum, blue-eyed man from the famous Khalidi family in Jerusalem. So to David, with my best wishes, Rashid Khalidi, autographed. Recent book, Rashid Khalidi is often on Democracy Now!, Amy Goodman, and I think he's in Colombia, and he's recognized probably as one of the bigger scholars on the Palestinian side. And but he came to the Arab American Museum, and I went down there, and it was co-hosted by the Jewish Voice for Peace. I waited in line. I got it autographed. Jewish Life and Thought Among Greeks and Romans, primary readings. So ancient history of Jews in Roman time, Second Temple period, era, and after. Actually, one of my favorite subjects, Second Temple Judaism. The Talmud is in the Second Temple period. So when I first started studying history, most Orthodox Jews, like yeshiva people who study Talmud, don't really study much history. And so after I started going to University of Michigan, and while I was still studying Talmud, I did a lot of research into Second Temple period Judaism in order to understand the Talmud better. And, it's a period of constant research that I do. This is an interesting book, Palestine by Huron Yahya, and I bought this at an Arabic store in Brooklyn. And he's a Turkish author, pro-Palestinian, might even be considered anti-Semitic or Hamas supporting. But, so it's about Palestine and the Temple Mount. and from the Palestinian side, a popular Turkish author, Huran Yahweh. Yeah, actually, I bought a book he wrote on anti-evolution. So, interesting author. And so this is, from the extreme Palestinian side, but actually very interesting. Ari Shavit, My Promised Land, popular Israeli author that's kind of considered anti-Zionist, and served in the Israeli army and had his misgivings about the current state of the conflict, and is kind of like an Israeli dissident. Not as much as I'm forgetting the guy who writes for Unz that played with Pink Floyd, but he was considered an Israeli dissident. My Promised Land, his the triumph and tragedy of Israel. And this book also Bilan and the Nonviolent Resistance by Iyad Burnett, which eventually became Five Broken Cameras. So I actually have this autographed to my friend David, Iyad Burnett, also in Arabic, and he came and showed film here. He came twice. So when he was making his film Five Broken Cameras, he came and actually donated a little bit of money, like $20 to him. And then he came again after he made Five Broken Cameras and showed it at the Arab American Museum. God forbid, pretty sad stuff with Israeli brutality towards relatively nonviolent Palestinian protesters. That became the film Five Broken Cameras. So hope Iyad's doing well. Here, Herzl, The Jewish State, famous translation of the original The Jewish State by Herzl. When I was in Stony Brook, they had this in the university press, and then I was very religious. This is like the first heretical Zionist book that I read. So this is Herzl's The Famous Jewish State, the kind of the primary text of Zionism. Alan Dershowitz, The Case for Israel. I watch the Dersh Show, semi-regularly. So, pretty famous, popular book, Alan Dershowitz, The Case for Israel. Conflicts in the Middle East since 1945. And this doesn't just have Israel, but, a little primer on conflicts in the Middle East since 1945. Civilian occupation, the politics of Israeli architecture. So I'm actually going to move this. I'm going to put this together with my architecture books. Being Palestinian Makes Me Smile by Amir Zar. And I have this autographed by Amir Zar. So I went to a Palestinian event. I've met Amir Zar. I actually recommended Adam Green having Amir Zar on. He was on eventually Sula. Joseph Cohn of Israel Advocacy. I recommended he's kind of made like hate videos against Amir Zar. I recommend him actually just trying to talk with him. But being Palestinian, he's more a comedian, but he's also a law professor at University of Detroit. Being Palestinian Makes Me Smile, Amir Zar. Duvid's autographed copy. Palestine, It's Something Colonial by Hatim Bazanian, Decolonizing the Mind. So kind of a history of Zionism from the anti-Zionistic Palestinian perspective. Here I'd mention Shai Cohn, Maccabees, from the Maccabees to the Mishnah. Shai Cohn, one of the scholars of Second Temple of Judaism, a little bit heretical, but he studies a lot of Talmud and the history of the Talmud, Second Temple Judaism. So here, from the Maccabees to the Mishnah, interesting book. I think I read an article out of that on one of my Ask the Rabbis. Israel and the Family of Nations, the Jewish Nation, State, and Human Rights, Jacobson and Rubenstein. And this is kind of like a pro-Jewish book about human rights defending attacks against Zionism. And the Israel Lobby enters state government, rise of the Virginia Israel Advisory Board, Grant Smith. So maybe I'll put this with my counter-Semitic book. As say Grant Smith is one of the big anti-Israel advocates, American, that's more about diminishing the role of Israel in American politics. So this is interesting. The last few decades, the Virginia Israel Advisory Board. So there's been a lot of Israelis. So Virginia is a very pro-Israel state, and a lot of Israelis have moved to Virginia, and they have a lobbying arm. So he covers kind of the history of the Israeli lobbying arm in the state of Virginia to the passing of these like anti-BDS resolutions and the official Virginia Israel Advisory Board. Okay, so I'm going to do my architecture books, and a lot of these are pretty cool. So, it said this is my field. This is like 40 pounds. Well, I can feel that in my back. That one's heavy. So most of these are just history of synagogues. So they're not, architecture, but they're history of synagogues. And, so these books I really like, is more my special interest. So here, synagogues without Jews and the communities that built and used them. So here is pictures of historical synagogues, mostly across Europe, that are no longer in use. So as the stories, God forbid, of mostly European synagogues, communities that were destroyed, World War II and the Holocaust, but the buildings still stand today. Some of them are upkept, some of them are in ruins. So interesting book, Synagogues Without Jews. This is an interesting book also. They actually sold this at Eichler's. Contested Holiness, Jewish, Muslim, and Christian Perspectives on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, Rivka Gonen. Just like I said, Contested Holiness, Jewish, Muslim, and Christian Perspectives on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. For years, like that was my main area of study, like the Temple Mount and the Third Temple, till I came back here to Detroit. But when I was in New York, that's like all I thought about. And when I first came back to Detroit, like the Third Temple was like all I thought about. And so, I got like every book that I could possibly get on any perspective on the subject. New Israeli Architecture by Amiram Harlap, which, is what it says. This is a Fairline Dickinson University Press, and is just modern Israeli architecture. This was a really cool book. I bought it at Eichler's also. It was written by Mordechai Arbel, who was a diplomat from Israel, the Jewish nation of the Caribbean, the Spanish Portuguese Jewish settlements in the Caribbean, and the Guyans, and God forbid, a lot of information about the slave trade. So, even though he was an Israeli diplomat, he includes, God forbid, the negative history about Jewish involvement in the slave trade, but it has really an overview of all of the Jewish settlements in the Caribbean islands, across South America, and Cuba, Jamaica, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, St. Thomas, St. Croix, St. Martin, St. Euthanez, St. Christopher Nevis, Guadalupe, Martinique, Barbados, Tobago, Trinidad. Basically, almost all of the Caribbean islands have synagogues, had early Jewish settlers, some going back before America. And, they're interesting. They had like sand, a lot of them had sand synagogues. So the synagogue floors were, sand. Some of the founders of some of these synagogues were slave traders, sugar traders. So, Mordecai Arbel, who was a diplomat of Israel and a scholar, Jewish nation of the Caribbean, the Spanish Portuguese Jewish settlements of the Caribbean and the Guyanas. The Synagogues of London, Paul Lindsay. So I believe the oldest synagogue in London had its 400-year anniversary. Actually, my local Young Israel rabbi's brother was recently became a rabbi in London at one of the old synagogues that hardly has any members. Just a small minyan in downtown London, historical one. Nice book of the historical synagogues of London. Many of them are not that much in use anymore. Daniel Libeskind, Jewish Museum of Berlin. So, Daniel Libeskind, very famous Jewish architect, designed famous buildings all over the world. So, most notably, the Jewish Museum of Berlin. Here's Phaidon. So, I showed I have a whole bunch of Phaidon books in my civil engineering, and I actually have like 10 more Phaidon books that I haven't read yet, more upstairs that I bought. So here's Phaidon's The Synagogue, and it goes from ancient history and all over the world, and fabulous synagogues from more the architectural perspective. The Phaidon publisher, The Synagogue. Here's Churches and Monasteries of the Holy Land. So this actually, churches and monasteries of the Holy Land in Israel, historical. Some of these, from like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the monasteries going back thousands of years to ones that were built in the last few hundred years by David Rapp and Hanan Issachar. This is actually a very interesting book. Synagogues of New York, History of a Jewish Community by Oscar Israelovich. So, a lot of old synagogues. There's thousands of synagogues in like Metro New York, many of them going back hundreds of years. So, nice overview of historical synagogues in New York. And Jerusalem Architecture by David Kroyanker. So just generic history of architecture in Jerusalem from ancient times to modern times, and the modern Israel, post the State of Israel, modern architecture. It's an interesting book. I've a number of books on modern Israeli architecture. She actually came to University of Michigan to speak. Alona Nitzan Shiftan, Seizing Jerusalem, the Architecture of Unilateral Unification. And this focuses on the modern urban planning and zoning of Jerusalem, I think like post-1967, and a little bit on modern Israeli politics and zoning law, and the current Jerusalem. Silent Places, Landscapes of Jewish Life and Loss in Eastern Europe. So a lot of these are destroyed buildings, so just pictures of former synagogues and Jewish life mostly destroyed in World War II. Synagogue architecture in the United States. I bought this book used. It was kind of like poor quality former library book, but pretty interesting. This is actual on the architecture of synagogues, and you see a transformation of eras of the American synagogue, especially the reform of when Jews used to live in urban areas and downtowns, to in the 60s and 70s, where you had a mass movement of Jews to the suburbs, and a lot of massive synagogues were built in the 60s and 70s into the 80s. And then you've had a decline in the building of synagogues recently. So there's eras. It's a pretty interesting subject. Dreaming Gardens, Landscape Architecture and the Making of Modern Israel. So this is more landscape Israel in modern Israel, related to like civil engineering, water, various things. This one's also very interesting. Most of the the nicest synagogues in America are Reform Judaism. So this is the architecture, Reform Judaism, and architecture. And this also goes back to Germany. This is actually, I think, a German book. So the famous Reform synagogues that were built in Germany before the war. Also, another good book, American Synagogues: A Century of Architecture in the Jewish Community. Samuel Gruber. This is a Rizzoli book. Very interesting. Just a collection of synagogues across America, and from an architectural perspective. Landmark of the Spirit, the Eldridge Street Synagogue. So I'd been here. This had a $10-15 million repair project recently. I think it's maybe even in Chinatown. So I live in the Lower East Side. There's not much of a Jewish community anymore, but they got big fundraising to repair it. The Eldridge Street Synagogue, Landmark of Spirit, Annie Pollard. Another good book, Jerusalem Architecture, Periods and Style, David Kroyenker. A few books by him. Synagogues of the United States. Another Oscar Israelovich. So I think he had Synagogues of New York, and another one, Synagogues of the United States. And Carol Krinsky, Synagogues of Europe, Architecture, History, and Meaning. And all of these are very interesting. I had a lot of enjoyment in reading these. Maybe I'll try to do even a history of synagogue architecture and urban planning. And you could note the change in structure related to Orthodox reform in the city, reform in the suburb, to like making a statement, the eras of Judaism. So very interesting books. Like that might be a topic I'll return to, would be the history of the synagogue, general, and maybe with a perspective on architecture. So I'd have to try to find some I'd do some research. I would get screen shares. That might be a topic that I'll come back to in the next few months. And these are more just books on the topic. So here was a civil occupation that I was showing earlier, the politics of Israeli architecture from, like a colonial settler project, and kind of like how architecture and construction is used to help Israeli domination over Palestinians. Adina Hoffman, Till We Have Built Jerusalem, Architects of a New City. So this more the biographies of, I think, 3 prominent architects that have been vital in the rebuilding of Jerusalem in the last few decades. Jewish Sanctity in the Atlantic World, the Social and Architectural History. So this also Barry Stifel, a South Carolina press book. So, interesting history of the synagogue in America, architectural. The architectural history of the Church and Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem. This was also very interesting. This is just about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the architectural history by Reverend Robert Willis. Historical Synagogues of Philadelphia and the Delaware Valley. So, basically just pictures, Philadelphia and the Delaware Valley historical synagogues. Here's The Subversive Utopia, Louis Kahn and the Question of National Jewish Style in Jerusalem by Yasser Sakir. So I think is a Palestinian, examining also kind of like the politics of settler colonialism in terms of architecture, focus on Louis Kahn, who very famous architect, not Albert Kahn, but also did work in Jerusalem. Here's a Second Temple era building Jewish in the Roman East. So about Jewish buildings and synagogues in the Roman East. So there's a lot of architectural evidence of Jews and synagogues all over Roman ruins. So in Rome itself, Alexandria, a lot of, their Jews were almost 10% of the Roman Empire. And, they say Jews made up 5% of Rome itself. And in Rome's heyday, 5% of the citizens of Rome were Jews. And almost all of the major Roman cities, developments had Jews living there. And, so there's a large architectural record of Jewish building all across, the Roman East. Hollowland, Israel's Architecture and Occupation, I.L. Weizmann. Sorry, this is Peter Richardson, I think a non-Jewish author. This is a pretty well-known book. Hollowland, Israel's Architecture of Occupation, a lot of books on this subject, kind of, examining the role of architectural and construction related to Israel's occupation. This was a really good book. I actually bought this in the gift shop museum, the Isagna Monument to the Portuguese Jewish Culture. So the Isagna is the oldest synagogue in Europe, the Portuguese synagogue in Amsterdam that's like 350 years old, maybe 400 years old. I think I said it actually Cochin in India has the longest continual use synagogue in the world. But this is the oldest synagogue in Europe. And I went, my parents, and we visited and toured it. And this book I bought in the gift shop, the Isagna. So if you're in Amsterdam, definitely check that out. Okay, so I'm going to do these books here. So I have two more shelves. Wipe these down a little bit. Get the dust off. So I have two shelves here I'm going to do next week. So I have two more shelves of books and then a few random books. So these books, I don't call them Jewish history. Some of these are Torah books or random books that I just put together. So I'm going to do these and I have one more shelf. So hopefully, like another hour probably here. So thank God I got a lot of books on Judaism. So it's, been a pleasure showing these off and, going down memory lane in my studies. So, thanks to those in the chat. Haven't, you appreciate if, people in the chat, if you're enjoying this. So here's a semi-famous academic book, The Hebrew Goddess by Raphael Patai. It's a historical book on academic book on possible Hebrew idols, the goddess Ashera, Astara, Nath, the cherubim, Shekhinah, Matronit, and use Lilith, and possibly the Sabbath itself. So this is an academic book analyzing the possibility that in ancient times and certain references in the Torah were actually idols. The Hebrew goddess by Raphael Patai, and this is Wayne State University Press, local, locally printed right near me in Detroit. It's a heretical book, but it examines some of these interesting. You hear like about Lilith and Astara and the possibility that there were these pagan goddesses that the ancient Israelites that worshipped and were incorporated into the Jewish religion. Interesting, the historical atlas of Judaism. Chartwell, like a bargain book. I think maybe I got this at Borders even or Barnes and Noble. I like these books, but long range history maps, the historical atlas of Judaism. This is a pretty interesting book, Talmudic Stories, Narrative Art, Composition, and Culture, and it examines just a handful of stories from the Talmud, some famous stories, and how they're interpreted. This is John Hopkins Press. I didn't put it in my Torah book because it's kind of like heretical, but it was an interesting Talmudic analysis of multiple Aggadah stories in the Talmud, and like a historical narrative understanding of Aggadah stories in the Talmud. This is kind of random book. I'm not Yoram Boga's Genesis and Genes, that's trying to like tie together modern science and the book of Genesis, specifically on biology and genes. Here another book, Jacob Neusner, The Way of Torah. Jacob Neusner, the conservative rabbi, we spoke about it on Luke Ford, did a few streams about him. He wrote like more books than any author ever, hundreds of books. He was the head of I think JTS, or one of the conservative seminaries. So just the outlook of how to understand Torah. Coming Home, 20 Glimpses from the Road to Return in Modern America. Kind of, I saw recent article about the death of the Bali Tshuva movement. And I think this is inspired by the Bostoner Rebbe, of just, stories of, I guess people like Duvid who, were secular Jews and became more Orthodox. This is I think the Masorah publication, the Rishonim. So they're very important in Jewish history. The rabbis, I've talked about this many times, the history of the rabbis, the Talmudic rabbis, of the Tanoim and the Amorim. Then you have the Gaonim, and then you have the Rishonim, the first rabbis in Europe, and then the Achronim. So here's just a history of the Rishonim, and it's more like a dictionary with just names one after the next. And God forbid you think like the 109. A lot of these occurred in the Rishonic era, where there are a lot of expulsions and Jews moving around from one community to the next in early Europe. And another, The Light of Exiles, early Achronim. Rabbi Zechariah Fendel of the period after the Rishonim. This would be like 1600 period of your rabbinic period after the Rishonim, the first Jews, the Rishonim, the first Jewish rabbis in Europe, to after the closing of that period, to like the beginning of the Enlightenment or Renaissance, so called the Achronim. So these are the early Achronim rabbis. This is kind of a random Torah book, Through Music and Song, Music from a Torah Perspective, Rabbi Elisha Sandler. So just a book about a Jewish approach towards music. This was written by a local rabbi in Detroit, Your Concealed Legacy, Yaakov Britvin, uncovering the profundity and elegance of Torah by dispelling 10 of its most prevalent myths. Mark Shapiro, Luke Ford's favorite, The Limits of Orthodox Theology. Me and Luke, maybe did like 10 streams on this, covering this book. And Luke actually read through a lot of the chapters and we discussed it. And, so Luke is, at least was, I don't know how much anymore, like, probably the single biggest Mark Shapiro fan there is. So here was his book. We covered anyone who watches Luke Ford. Remember, we did like a few weeks covering this book, that Maimonides' 13 Principles, academic perspective. Actually, a pretty good book. I ordered that for Luke, that for the purpose of covering on Luke's show. I ordered that book. With All Your Heart, the Shema in Jewish Worship and Practice, Meir Levin. Obviously the Shema, I've been saying the Shema prayer for over 25 years, my whole adult Jewish life. As far as I remember, without exception, every single day, morning and night, my whole adult Jewish life, over 25 years, I've said the Shema prayer in the morning and at night. It's a mitzvah commanded. High tea is going. So a book on With All Your Heart, the Shema prayer. Okay, keep on moving. So Revelation and Authority, Sinai and Jewish Scripture and Tradition, Benjamin Summer. So it's kind of like interdenominational. How do we look at the authority of the Scripture coming from God, inspired? What are the small details and difference, and what does it mean? Samish. I say Natilat Yadayin often, although I'm not sure that I'm expert at always saying it. I also have been saying Asher Yotzer, the prayer after using the bathroom. So if I have bread, I wash my hands. Like I always wash my hands before bread, because that's a lot of superstition of bad things. Like, so if I have bread, I'm very careful to wash my hands. Of actually saying the blessing, I might sometimes be lax in saying that. Although Asher Yotzer, that I always say, like without exception, my whole adult life. When I use the bathroom, I say the Asher Yotzer prayer. This is an interesting book. If Samish is here, this is written by a Detroit author. The Sanctity of the Synagogue: The Case for the Mechitza Separation Between Men and Women in the Synagogue, by Baruch Litvin. And this actually in Sterling Heights, the B'nai Moshe Synagogue in Michigan was Orthodox, and there was a small Orthodox community there for a period of time, and they were kind of disbanded. They weren't really that Orthodox in the first place. And then the board of directors turned conservative, and they voted to get rid of the Mechitza. And Baruch Litvin took them to court to prevent them from getting rid of the Mechitza. And it reached the Michigan State Supreme Court. And I think he actually won the court case that prevented them from switching from Orthodox to conservative and getting rid of the Mechitza. And then the synagogue, was so bitter of the dispute that the synagogue ended up shutting down, and it was torn down. They built a new one. Now it's conservative anyways. And Baruch Litvin, moved on. I don't think he lives in Metro Detroit anymore. And it kind of ruined the synagogue, this battle. But this fight that went to the Michigan Supreme Court case about trying to get rid of a synagogue and switch from Orthodox to conservative, set precedents across the whole United States and the legal system. And he wrote a book, The Sanctity of the Synagogue, of the origin of the Mechitza, the separation requirement between men and women, and actually having a separation wall. And this is a really interesting book. I was mentioning it to actually Henry Abramson. I was in his chat. He hadn't heard of it. I mentioned this to Charles Moskowitz, and God forbid, he just never gets this. I've told him 100 times, about and it's actually a big deal in modern Israeli politics now with the coalition deal and the grandchild clause. So when Ben-Gurion in the 50s was the prime minister of Israel, and they were first creating the basic laws, and the right of return for who could become an Israeli citizen, Ben-Gurion queried leaders of world Jewry to question how they should define Judaism for Israeli citizenship. And he spoke to Israeli rabbis, European rabbis, American rabbis, including the Lubavitcher Rebbe, before the Rebbe became Rebbe, Aaron Cutler, Shlomi Goren, of also the head of the JTS, Louis Finkelstein at the time, the World Union of Progressive Judaism. He asked Israeli scholars, European scholars, and American scholars, Israeli jurists from the Supreme Court like Chaim Cohn, and Israeli authors, essayists, and a few other known Jewish personalities. And this is a translation. Most of these were written in Hebrew, some of them in English, of the who is a Jew question. And so Israel, if you know the history, ruled you don't have to be halakhically Jewish to get Israeli citizen. And now what they refer to as the grandchild clause, that if you would have been killed by the Nazis, you're eligible for Israeli citizenship, and your grandchildren are also eligible for Israeli citizenship. So meaning that you didn't have to be halakhic Jew, but if you would have been killed by the Nazis, you're eligible to become Israelis, and your grandchildren are. So, like your grandchild, if a Jewish man married a non-Jewish woman and she didn't convert, and their grandchildren are eligible for Israeli citizenship. And the biggest deal now is with the Russians, and except if you became Christian. So that was a Supreme Court case. And I mentioned this to Charles like 100 times, and he always forgets, and he's like, no, that can't be. I was like, what? This is Israeli Supreme Court. This is Israeli law. Unless you convert to Christianity. So even if you're 100% Jewish, if you convert to Christianity, you are no longer eligible for the right of return. And that goes against Jewish law. According to Jewish law, even if you convert to Christianity, you're still Jewish. But in the state of Israel, even if you're 100% Jewish, if you convert to Christianity, you forfeit your right of return. That was a Supreme Court case. So this question of who is a Jew, these are the famous letters solicited and translated, actually by the same author, Litvin, who he was from Michigan, and was the Michigan Supreme Court case on the mechitza and the sanctity of the synagogue. So Jewish identity, this is a very important book, and it's very big in Israeli politics. One of the demands for the coalition, Netanyahu had 30 days to become, make the coalition for prime minister, and couldn't do it. And he has a 10-day extension that runs out, I think, Sunday. And one of the demands is to revoke the grandchild clause, which is this law of Ben-Gurion that said you don't actually have to be Jewish according to Jewish law to have the right of return. And American Jews like Charles Moskowitz, or people like are all Reform Jews, are very upset, but relatively not that many American Jews become Israeli citizens. 2,000 to 3,000 each year, and that's higher in recent years. In previous years, it was even less. Some years it was less than 1,000 American Jews become Israeli citizens each year. But the more recent years, maybe like 3,000 American Jews become Israeli each year. And of those, only a handful, like tens of them, would be people who are not halakhically Jewish. However, in Russia and Ukraine, you have tens of thousands each year, Russian and Ukrainians, that use the right of return to become Israeli citizens. And this year in Ukraine, you had refugees in the mass, biggest numbers ever. So, even of all the Ethiopia, so at this point, it's estimated that there is about 500,000 Russian, Ukrainian, non-Jews in Israel. And the reason that is because of the grandfather clause. So you just have to have a tiny bit of Jewish blood to have the right of return, and even if they're not Jewish by Jewish law. So this goes back to Ben Gurion, and this I highly recommend this book. If you haven't read this, Samish, I would even recommend, if you want to buy a copy, you can even meet me. I'll let you borrow this book if you're interested. You might even be able to find a bootleg or free copy online. Ben Gurion solicited letters from the rabbis and Jewish leaders on this question, who is a Jew, and went against the rabbis. All the rabbis were like, you must reject those people's Judaism. And even it broke apart the rabbinate. Like Rabbi Eliashiv was working together with the state of Israel. And so this in the Langer case about Mamzeros. But this was one of the things that caused some of the early Haredim to turn against Israel, was when Israel used a non-halachic definition of who is a Jew. And even the Lubavitch Rebbe, Rav Aaron Kotler, was like, you must only include halachic Jews. Under no circumstance should Israel give citizenship to people who only have a Jewish father. And you could read like the rabbis who are all like gung-ho, like you cannot under any circumstance allow these people into the state of Israel as Jews. But Ben Gurion and the original Israelis went against the recommendation of the rabbis and had the wide picture definition of who is a Jew that's now referred to as the grandfather clause. And that is the biggest news in Israeli politics this week. It might prevent Netanyahu from becoming prime minister again. Netanyahu, like Ben Gvir, Charles Moskowitz was saying, oh, he was on Barry Weiss, and he's telling the American media that he's going to keep Ben Gvir in check, and saying that's just nonsense. He says in the English audience, Ben Gvir, basically owns Netanyahu. My opinion, just getting a little off topic, but the revoking of the grandfather clause and what it means to be a Jew, this possibly is the biggest news story in Israeli history in decades. Like, not, obviously war and the Israeli-Palestine conflict. And if Netanyahu doesn't buckle, he may not be prime minister. For Netanyahu to become prime minister again, the rabbis, the United Torah Judaism, are unequivocally demanding to revoke the citizenship of non-halachic Jews in the state of Israel. So highly recommend this book, Jewish Identity, the letters to Ben Gurion in 1950, of what it means to be, who is a Jew. Another interesting book, Women in Communal Prayer, Halachic Perspective. This is written by like a bunch of conservative or open Orthodox rabbis. They're kind of claiming that women should be allowed to be included in minyan, and try from a halakhic perspective, historical. What's the origin of the male minyan, or only males being included? This is a JOFA, the Jewish Feminist Association publication book. This is a very interesting book. I actually still plan on doing a series on Judaism and slavery. And, so here's the curse of Ham, race and slavery in early Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and the question of slavery and the possible curse on Black people, and the earliest source material in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, Goldenberg. So I might come back, and I have asked the rabbi, planned on the topic for over a year, but haven't done it. It's an interesting academic book, The Hebrew Bible, History of Interpretation by Harrelson, which just kind of like an overview of various commentaries on the Hebrew Bible. Here, my local Rabbi Emeritus of the local Young Israel, to David, thank you for your friendship. Rabbi Goldberg, who retired from Young Israel, was a Yeshiva University rabbi, I think from the South originally, and he opened up Kids Kicking Cancer, Power, Peace, Purpose. And, God forbid, his daughter passed away young, and he dedicated himself to children with terminal diseases and he opened up this organization where he teaches karate to kids and breathing exercises, and a lot of the kids die or have very difficult pain. And his catchphrase expression, besides for power, peace, purpose, is a perfect God created an imperfect world perfectly. Rabbi Goldberg, God bless him, kids kicking cancer, started in Metro Detroit. I think it's actually spread around the world now. Became pretty popular. 30 life lessons from kids kicking cancer. Defining Humanity, Exploring Torah Insights into Man in Morality by Rabbi Dov Barish Gan. So this is actually a commentary on Bereshis, with questions of humanism. This is a really interesting book. Like if High T's there, he might find this interesting. 50 Jewish Messiahs by Jerry Rabau, and it's just a history, not just Shabbatai Tzvi, but of 50 different potential false messiahs in Jewish history. Here is Akiva Tatz and David Gottlieb, Or Samaic rabbis. David was an Or Samaic and had both of these rabbis. David Gottlieb, more, but Akiva Tatz, he came here to Metro Detroit. Someone actually sent me this book when I started getting into Hinduism, to try to get me out of it. But this was their book, Letters to a Buddhist Jew. And Storytelling and Spirituality in Judaism, Yitzhak Birnbaum, on overview of the role of storytelling and spirituality in Judaism. You're saying in the Talmud, rabbinic Lord rabbis in general tell a lot of stories. Righteous Gentiles in the Hebrew Bible, Ancient Role Models for Sacred Relations. So an overview of some of the righteous Goyim Gentiles: Melchizedek, Hagar and Ishmael, Tamar, Asnat, Shifra and Purah, Bitya, Paro's daughter, Jethro, Rachav, Yael, Hiram, Nam, the sailors of the Ninevehs, Ruth, Cyrus, and Dama ben Natina. So overview of some of the righteous Gentiles in the Hebrew Bible. Stories from Ancient Canaan. So this is text translations of some of the text, what's known about the ancient Canaanite religion, edited by Michael David Coogan. The Gods Are Broken, The Hidden Legacy of Abraham by Rabbi Jeffrey Selkin. And so the legacy of Abraham, and I guess his role of the Midrashic story of destroying his father's idols. And last but not least, from this shelf is The Science of God by Gerald Schroeder, who was on Root and Branch. So me and Jennifer had spoke to Gerald Schroeder. Gerald Schroeder was in the last few weeks on T-Jump, talking with T-Jump. But this was I think his other book, Genesis and the Bible and the Science of God. And I had a chance to speak with him and Jennifer also on Lowell on Root and Branch. And, God forbid, Les Glassman's YouTube channel got struck, so you can't even find that video anymore. And Lowell, Root and Branch is no longer on YouTube. But, Gerald Schroeder, MIT physicist. In the Orthodox world, he's probably the most respected, educated, well-known physicist that tries to combine belief in the Torah and his understanding of the God's eye perspective of the 6 days of creation versus the man's eye perspective, and saying the billions of years and the 6 days are actually one and the same for the man's eye and the God's eye perspective. So interesting book, Gerald Schroeder's Science of God. Check out his appearance on T-Jump recently. So I got one more shelf of books and a few more random ones, and actually I have Luke Ford ones here too. So let's keep it going a little bit more. Chazdei Hashem ki lo samnu, ki lo huli rachman. Chazdei Hashem ki lo samnu, ki lo huli rachman. Chazdei Hashem ki lo samnu, ki lo huli rachman. Chazdei Hashem ki lo samnu, ki lo huli rachman. Okay, so God forbid us to get some of my trolls here. So whatever, God bless. So hopefully people take this a little more seriously. But trolling, bad habit. So these are kind of random books like Jewish history on various topics. I might also eventually do a stream on this. I used to argue, like the JQ and Jews being good for society. So Jews in medicine, religion, culture, and science. I have quite a few books on Jews in medicine, the history and role of Jews in medicine. Still in America today, Jews make up about 10% of doctors and dentists across the whole United States. And, the long history of Jews in medicine. Interesting book, Choosing Yiddish, New Frontiers of Language and Culture of Yiddish in Modern American Culture, not just Orthodox Jews, but the small amount of secular Jews who continue to try to speak and retain Yiddish culture in America. Haiti, Thin Description, Ethnography in the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem. So, Kanye West, we got Ye24 in the chat. So this is the history of the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem that I believe came from Chicago. So there's a level that of the origin of African Hebrew Israelism, the group in Dimona that originated in Chicago. So Thin Description by John Jackson. Gunner. So here's India's Israel Policy by Kumaraswamy. So this is actually a very interesting book. Like I was on Jai Devi and mentioned, the history, Gandhi's kind of opposition to the state of Israel, and the first Muslim prime minister, that the partition plan, the one state, one nation, two states policy, to the rise of Hindu nationalism and now modern pro-Israel sentiment, that only in the last decade or so has India became a very strong ally of Israel with the rise of Hindu nationalism. And Hindu nationalism derives some motivation from Zionism, but originally India was generally pro-Arab, because they have the huge Islamic population. Gandhi opposed the founding of Israel. I forget the second prime minister's name's slipping me. Indira Gandhi also was kind of neutral towards Israel, even siding with Arab countries. So interesting diplomatic history between India and Israel. James Loeffler, Rooted Cosmopolitans, Jews and Human Rights in the 20th Century. So a history of the role of Jews in human rights. So he's something like Kevin McDonald, but it's a pro-Jewish book of the role of Jews in human rights. Samuel Friedman, Jew versus Jew, the struggle for the soul of American Jewry. And you see a lot of this in, like on YouTube, all over the place. Jewish sectarianism. What does it mean to be a Jew? Who should speak for the Jews? Jewish organizations that are one up against each other, trying to push for different things in American Judaism. So Samuel Friedman, Jew versus Jew, the struggle for the soul of American Jewry. Another one, Andrew Hines, Jews and the American Soul, Human Nature in the 20th Century. So this is more kind of like the Americanization of Judaism and the Judaization of America and certain aspects of popular Judaic culture that have entered widespread America, like Freud, Viktor Frankl, other things that have kind of entered the American mind, Jews and the American soul. Modern medicine, Jews medicine in the medieval society, Joseph Schatzmiller, and Jews from the founding of the university system. Their very first universities, medical schools. So you had Catholic institutes, and so the very first universities that had medical schools had Jews at them, and special exceptions to allow Jews to attend the medical schools. And it's a nice history of Jews, medicine, and medieval society. Another nice book, Judaism and Science, a historical introduction of the view of Jews towards science. So you have the religious perspective, which could almost be anti-scientific, and then the role of kind of the secular Jew and the involvement and reaction to the Enlightenment, Judaism and Science Historical Introduction by Noah Ephron. Jacob's Legacy, a book about DNA, the most study on genetics, and I bought this used, an old library book, Yale Press, Jacob's Legacy by David Goldstein, A Genetic View of Jewish History. Another one, Abraham's Children, Race, Identity, and DNA of the Chosen People by John Entine. Question, what do we know from modern genetic testing about the origins or relatedness of the Jewish people? And there's a lot more stuff that's came out recently. So these are older books of new information constantly. One of the hotbeds of modern Jewish history research. Samish, I say not all doctors were Jewish. So I don't think that's the case at all. That I was saying the first medical schools, I think in Padua in Italy, like 800 years ago when they founded the first medical schools, they were all ran by the Catholic Church, and they allowed Jews to enter them. So there was a percent, like 5 to 10% of the medical schools, almost all of them across Europe had Jewish students. But no, I think there would have been a noticeable amount of Jewish doctors, maybe like 5 to 20%. I'm not sure there was ever a case where all Jews were doctors. And medicine largely arises from Spain, where the history of Jewish medicine is largely like I said, a Roman Greek invention. That like medicine today, you have the sorry, I'm not sure my thing went out, so I'm just trying to fix this real quick. So let me see what okay, so hopefully that's working. So for whatever reason, one of my computers, StreamYards, went out for a second.
Working.
So Jews in Medicine, an Epic Saga, Frank Heinrich. So I've read quite a few books on the subject. My father's a doctor. My father was part of an organization when we went to France and London. It was through an organization where my dad was studying American history. So I mean, it could be the top doctors were some of them, were Jews, like Maimonides. I'm not even sure that was the case all across Europe or even in the medical schools. But most of the medical schools, when they first opened, did allow Jews, and Jews were semi-prominent. It depends on different eras. So that's a topic I hope to return to. Maybe I'll do a stream at a future point of Jews in medicine, the history of Jews in medicine. Troubling the Waters, Black-Jewish Relations in the American Century by Cheryl Greenberg. So a lot of historians note this, but theoretically, like I mentioned, the Lila Corwin Berman book, there were some Jews involved in civil rights. A lot of most prominent non-Black proponents of civil rights were Jews. But there were a lot of Jews opposed to civil rights. Like the reason why Jews are in suburbs, a lot of it is because of white flight. The reason there's only Orthodox Jews in New York, in Brooklyn, is because all the non-Orthodox picked up and left in Metro Detroit. Even to various things like racism is rampant among the Jewish community. So not to say like a lot of the Jews that were involved in civil rights were communist or far left Jews outside of the mainstream community, but would be like the heyday of Black-Jewish relations in the 60s. Most people think it's on historic lows. And, so this book was, written before Kanye West, years ago, Troubling the Waters, Black-Jewish Relations in the American Century, Cheryl Greenberg. The Vision of Judaism by Dan Cohn Sherbach, Wrestling with God. And so I guess he's like a conservative rabbi talking about the belief system, and it's vaguely remembering reading this book, but how belief in Judaism is changing, or how it should adapt to the future, and this by conservative rabbi. So I have a whole bunch of these books about like the attempted revival of Reform and conservative Judaism. So these books are mostly written by Reform conservative rabbis that are attempting to revive Judaism. And there's been a big decline in Reform and conservative, and like Chabad is rising, as a lot of what historically would have been Reform and conservative just go to Chabad rabbis, even though they themselves may not be any more Orthodox than they were historically. And a lot of synagogues have shut down, declining memberships, empty nesters, children that aren't interested in being Reform or conservative. So there's a lot of recent scholarship in an attempt to revive non-Orthodox synagogues. And, so here's one of the popular, Ron Wolfson, Relational Judaism, Using the Power of Relationships to Transform the Jewish Community. So Ron Wolfson's a popular advisor to Reform conservative rabbis in revisiting the Reform movement, Relational Judaism. This House We Build, Lessons for Healthy Synagogues and the People Who Dwell There. Also, just questioning what's the role of the synagogue? How do we build a modern synagogue community that's successful for the needs of modern non-Orthodox Jews? Another Ron Wolfson book, The Spirituality of Welcoming, How to Transform Your Congregation into a Sacred Community. This one's pretty interesting. Rabbi Sidney Schwartz, Jewish Megatrends, Charting the Course of American Jewish Future, with contributions from a bunch of Reform and conservative rabbis. And it said these books were written in like the last 10 years, 20 years by leading figures in the Reform and conservative movement, trying to come up with some method to revitalize non-Orthodox Judaism through various methods. There are some successful, like with David Wolpe here, with Sharon Bruas, a handful of relatively successful Reform synagogues, but generally Reform conservative synagogues continue to be on the decline, and it's unclear how they serve the Jewish population or the Chabad model. Questions about membership, funding, Jewish day school, demographics, suburban, urban areas, politics. So I have a whole series of books on, written by Reform rabbis or Reform leaders on the attempt to stifle the decline of non-Orthodox Judaism in America and revitalize and make modern non-Orthodox synagogues relevant to non-Orthodox Jews in America. Another one, Chaim Herring, Tomorrow's Synagogue Today, Creating Vibrant Centers of Jewish Life. Daniel Elazar, Community and Polity, The Organizational Dynamics of American Jewry, like demographic study, also including organizational Jewry. New membership and financial alternatives for the American synagogue, from traditional dues to fair share to gifts from the heart, by Rabbi Olitsky. Mockers and Rockers, Chess Records in the Business of Rock and Roll. So not chess the game, but the Chess Brothers, who were in Chicago and like blues. They're famous record label producers, nightclub owners in Chicago, the Chess Brothers. Empower Judaism, What Independent Minyanim Can Teach Us About Building Vibrant Jewish Communities. So synagogue-less independent minyanim. Rethinking Synagogues, a New Vocabulary for Congregational Life, by Rabbi Lawrence Kaufman. There was a period of time where I was working with, when the downtown synagogue was moving reform before they hired the new rabbi, and I was working with like an organization called The Well. They had the card Rabbi Dan Horowitz. Now he's became a reform rabbi. But I was working with him, and I read all these books on the subject. Jewish Explorations of Sexuality by Jonathan Maganet. Historical Overview. Speaking of the Jews by Lila Corin Berman, said one of my favorite authors of the Jewish Philanthropic Complex. I have this autograph also, 2015, to David, Lila Corin Berman. I highly recommend, probably, of the non-Orthodox books written in the last few decades, her Jewish Philanthropic Complex. Great book. This is just a generic okay book. Speaking of the Jews, rabbis, intellectuals, and the creation of American public identity, is more like a history of conservative Judaism. Covers some interesting, like the conversion of Marilyn Monroe, popular culture. But it's another book that my mom's currently borrowing on the Jewish Philanthropic Complex. That's an exceptional book. Jewish Polity and the American Civil Society, Communal Agencies, and Religious Movements in the American Public Square, edited by Middleman and Jonathan Sarnow. Collection of essays, like the alphabet soup of Jewish organizations. Social Foundations of Judaism, Calvin Goldsteiner and Jacob Neusner. Reform Judaism and Modernity, Jonathan Romaine. And Tradition in the Public Square, a David Novak reader. I think he was a conservative rabbi. So, so, last but not least, so Chabad in the last few years has tried to develop a curriculum for Chabad rabbis to train Jews. So the Bali Tshuva movement, Gandalf, thanks. So the Bali Tshuva movement has kind of died down. Like Chabad doesn't really make Bali Tshuva more offers rabbinic services to non-Orthodox Jews or sometimes even Orthodox Jews in remote areas that don't have an Orthodox community. But as they're training to non-Orthodox Jews, they've developed these series of books. The Rohr Institute, and it was funded by a millionaire, the Jewish Learning Institute, and he was the keynote speaker at this Kinos Shluchim, the gathering, worldwide gathering of all the Chabad rabbis. This year, it was 6,500 of them, and Rohr was the speaker. He's the one who donated for this. And so if you're affiliated with Chabad, in the last few years, you've seen they have like these now like 6-week courses where there'll be a course on some subject within Judaism, and they have these textbooks. The Jewish Learning Institute, kind of like, what does Judaism say about various issues? So I bought a handful of these. They're pretty introductory. This one, like, is a regular one, a lot of Chabad's Journey of the Soul, an exploration of life, death, and what lies beyond. So you mentioned like reincarnation, that Chabad preaches reincarnation. So you have like the 6-week course, and one of them will include talks about reincarnation and post-death. So, be like, you go to your local Chabad class, and then, you hear a lecture on that we actually do believe in reincarnation. But this is a pretty popular one, The Journey of the Soul. They offer this course at like almost all the Chabads now. So this, Rohr created the Jewish Learning Institute. Has said he was the keynote speaker at this year's Kinos Shluchim, the gathering this year of the most ever 6,500 rabbis. And so most Chabad houses now offer these regular courses. This one, Journey of the Soul, is one of the more popular ones they offer. Probably offered hundreds of Chabad houses. Here's one on Jewish history, flashbacks in Jewish history, how our past informs the future. Judaism Decoded, the origins and evolution of Jewish tradition. So these are all textbooks, mostly for adult education. So these, in fact, they're usually even like senior citizens that go to these classes, that would go to your local Chabad, and there would be people that didn't really have much of a Jewish education, and would be teaching like adult education, Judaism 101 to adults. And a lot of these are former Reform and Conservative Jews that Reform and Conservative no longer serves. Living with integrity, navigating everyday ethical dilemmas, how happiness thinks. I bought these in like 2016. They're really kind of introductory. Elections 2016. What does Judaism say? I'm not even sure if it mentions Trump, but just the general view of Judaism towards elections and government. Justice in the War on Terror. This is probably actually the best one of them. Gun Control and Immigration, a comparative exploration of Talmudic and American law, the Jewish view towards gun control. So, like, this is a direction Chabad has taken in the last few years. Samish, what's your opinion of Israel's Rabbi Bar Chaim take on Chabad as a movement of replacement theology? I'm not sure I've seen Rabbi Bar Chaim. If it's anti-Chabad, Chabad doesn't have that much power in Israel. There's like a decent amount of Chabad, but like the Haredim have way more power than Chabad in Israel. Most Chabad probably vote like Likud or various things, or sometimes like want to do the Kabbalah books, Rabbi Ginsburg, or like anti-Arab extremists. But Chabad is usually not in the wider tent of Haredim. In fact, the draft law for the deal, they were actually willing to exclude Chabad from the draft law. So like the coalition agreements about exemption for military service, they were willing to not include Chabad in the draft law exemption with the other Haredim. So it's more the international power of Chabad. It's a Chabad centered in Brooklyn. So, and Chabad is actually officially non-Zionist. that saying that Netanyahu is kind of like the Chabad plant. So interesting role. In so I haven't heard of Bar Chaim, call it replacement theology. So it's an interesting dynamic, like because it said in Israel, Chabad doesn't quite make the Haredi cut. So where they fall in, and also the number of Chabad in Israel, there's some, but like they're not even the biggest Hasidus. So there's the United Torah Judaism that teams together all the Hasidic groups, and it doesn't include Chabad, but Chabad's like probably like the lower of the top 10 biggest Hasidus of like Ger, Karlin Stolen, Bells, Sans Klosenberg, Vishnitz. They're all bigger than like the number of Chabad in number in Israel. So Chabad's power is more being based out of Brooklyn and an international power in terms of world affairs than actually within Israel. And so the relation to Israeli rabbis to Chabad, and a lot of times Chabad is somewhat like deferent to non-Chabad rabbis, Orthodox or Israeli rabbis. But you may talk about that a different time. And last but not least is the Luke Ford collection. So saved the best for last. The last of the books I'm going to do for today are Luke Ford's books. So God forbid, excommunicated, A Rebel Without a Shul, Luke Ford's autobiography, A Rebel Without a Shul, excommunicated, Luke Ford. Interesting book. So, God forbid, Luke Ford's autobiography, very interesting, a lot of interesting stuff in there. This one's actually a really good book. Yesterday's New Tomorrow, Inside Americans' Jewish Journalism, Luke Ford. So these are interviews with major Jewish publishers. And there's a lot of them. Like he interviews like 20 major publishers, and all these are big names. Let's look at find the table of contents. He has Gary Rosenblatt, Jonathan Sarnow, Rabbi Ari Shafran, Yossi Klein Levi, David Twersky, Deborah Rubin, and some generic articles. So he said like generally, so these are actually very interesting. And Luke Ford interviews like 50 different Jewish writers for Jewish papers, and kind of the note, hey, Jennifer, thanks for tuning in, that it's Jewish propaganda. Really, Jewish news is Jewish propaganda. And, the point is usually it's funded by Jewish agencies, and they kind of promote what their funders want them to promote. And, the whole concept of what is Jewish news, like Jewish propaganda, and, criticism and speaking about that with major Jewish publishers. So this is probably, I would say, Luke Ford's best book. Although, if you're interested in Luke Ford, God forbid, his autobiography. And this book could use a little bit more editing, but this is also very interesting. Luke Ford, The Producers, Profiles, and Frustration. So I think he said he wrote this because he wanted to write a book that there wasn't so many on. And so he interviews 68. There's 68 chapters, 68 different producers. Luke Ford interviews, and a lot of them are like Jews from Brooklyn. Not all Jews, but a lot of probably like over 75% of the interviewees in this book are Jews, and some interesting history of how they got their start in Hollywood, and various thoughts about producing. He asked like a lot of them about pornography, and so I think Luke Ford has another book, but interesting book. So last but not least, the Luke Ford collection. Okay, so if there's any questions or things in the chat, you put it there. 16 people watching, so glad people are tuning in. So I didn't see that much in the chat that I was responding to, but if anyone has any last comments or something, I'm about to sign off. Like I wanted to finish my Jewish books on Hanukkah, so I saw that if I did these books today, I would be able to finish my Jewish books next week, probably in one show. I have, I'll do my Hasidus and Kabbalah and Torah books. And I like a lot of those are just like Talmud. I have a whole shelf of Talmud or Torah, various books. So I might save that for a different time. I'm not going to go over and show all my Talmuds or different Masechtas. But I mentioned in the future, I'm thinking about, okay, Samish said he sent to my Gmail. Yeah, I mean, I'm Duvid at Hotmail and Duvid at Gmail, and we're friends on Facebook, but, Duvid at Hotmail or Gmail will do it. And Oliver asking about New Square. I've been to New Square, up Sock that no Jew can live within a mile radius of New Square. I mean, like no non-Orthodox, no non-square chassid Jew could live in New Square. So I mean, like, that God forbid that book, like, now not all those who leave return or something like that. But I mean, they might have strict rules about who could live there, and if if you're a non-Orthodox Jew, who could, but they also have U.S. law to conform to. So I'm going to continue my tour of my library. I'm working on my dad's library, and I don't know, my dad's not, probably wisely not that amenable to me filming or streaming from his house. But it's possible at some point I'll do some of my father's books. My father's got an exceptional, math and physics library, medical library, law library, science fiction, like exceptional comics, manga, uh, chess books, bridge books. But yeah, it might not be likely that I'll continue the series with my father's library, though I'm organizing my father's library. And but I'll probably carry on for close to another month and a half on my own library. And as I mentioned before, I have books on Christianity, books on African American culture in Africa, psychology, consciousness, Gurdjieff, politics, history, business. Definitely business. I probably 2 shelves on business. So at least another, probably 6 episodes. So probably through the end of January, I'm going to try to continue every Wednesday my tour of my library. So I'm going to try to keep this going. Next week, assuming that there's no Hanukkah party that I'm going to, I'll do the same time. Otherwise, I'll probably do Tuesday or Thursday. My Jewish books, where I'll do my Kabbalah and Hasidus books and Torah books. And I might try to do another Jewish show. So I'm going to try to start streaming 2 times a week. I'm doing Mob Talk on Mondays with John Wolf, who hopefully is going to start investing some money into a studio, and we'll see if we could grow Mob Talk Mondays. Charles Moskowitz, I did this Friday. I might stream with him tomorrow. He's trying to revive, he's switching to 8 o'clock at night. So if he wants, I'll probably still work together with him. We can review on Sundays. But on my own channel, I'm going to try to add another weekly show. So I'm going to do tour of my library probably through January, and I'm going to try to add a weekly Jewish topical show. And I might do an Ask the Rabbi for a few of those. I might just call them Ask the Rabbi, or I might do it something else. And like I said, I'll do them like topical of a Jewish topic, like Jews in medicine, the history of Hasidim, the history of the yeshiva movement, maybe on, the history of synagogues. And there'll be an overview of, historical overview and kind of like the role. And maybe I'll just do it Ask the Rabbi. but I'm going to try to revive that and do that weekly. So I appreciate everyone tuning in and being active in the chat. So yeah, I didn't do this as an AMA this week because I just wanted to get through my books without um, too much delay. So I'll try to read the chat through. Hopefully, there wasn't too much bad behavior, but I'd rather have kind of like serious people that are interested in the topics at hand. So like I might occasionally like Luke Ford or Adam Green or something else. Like it's possible, maybe Politically Provoked was even talking about having more Jewish debates, and maybe I'll rejoin the blood sports circuit on Judaism, and going over my library might be useful for that. So that we'll see, but so I'm going to keep up with this weekly tour of my library through January. I'm going to try to add probably the same time, Tuesday or Thursday afternoon or night, on a Jewish topic, and then maybe next year, after I finish tour of my library, I'm going to try to also do something weekly on my channel related to science, consciousness, and the multiple truth hypothesis. So I'll probably keep those separate. I'll do something on Judaism, and then I'll do something on the multiple truth hypothesis related more to science and consciousness. So appreciate everyone tuning in. God bless. Have a great night. Hanukkah is this Sunday, so I may stream some Hanukkah streams. I'm not sure if the Rabbi Stein from Southfield will call me. If he calls me, yeah, I'm a free speech, so Samish. I'm not like a stay away from kind of people. Like if Charles wants to keep on talking, I'll keep on talking. I mean, I could see why saying that's kind of like toxic. I'm not promoting that really. So if people like that content, you can follow his content. But if he keeps on wanting talking, I'll probably keep on talking. Generally, I talk to anybody, and so if you want to have, if you were a professor or part of some legitimate culture, I'm an alternative personality. No one's ever going to ask to speak to me. Like no one's ever going to put Duvid in front of a crowd. Even here in Metro Detroit, I've never been asked to speak at a synagogue. The downtown synagogue, I actually spoke there tens of times. I even gave the sermon Friday night. I did a lunch and learn there. But once they had like a rabbi and a board of directors, they never asked me to speak there. Like no official group is ever going to ask Duvid to speak. Like no university. Like I'm an alternative character, and so I have to work together with alternative media. So I'll probably continue to keep on working together with Charles Moskowitz. I don't have anyone else to work with, and generally I gotta speak to anybody. People want so, and I like Charles. He's an author. He's written tens of books. I can understand claiming he's toxic or it's not good for my reputation, but I don't really have a reputation. It's like you might have a reputation. You're a professor or part of some institution. I'm not part of some institution. I'm just an independent person, and like I'm already turning 45 years old. Like God forbid, no one ever asked me to speak to them. Like Duvid is never going to be mainstream. Like God forbid, decades. No one has ever asked me to speak to their group. No one has ever invited me for anything. So I don't think it's ever going to happen. So I don't think I'm losing something by like talking to Charles. Like I would have been invited to speak to some group had I not been speaking to Charles. So God forbid. So I probably will continue to work together with Charles, although it is kind of going nowhere. And he didn't really take any of my advice, and I wouldn't be. He'll probably keep on doing it. Thanks to truth. So yeah, alternative media is a tough thing. You got to work together with other people in alternative media, and say generally, I'm willing to work together with anyone. John Wolfe, I seriously hope he ups his game and like gets some better sound quality, or if he wants to keep on streaming, that he put some work into it. But I don't think there's anything wrong with Charles. I'm saying like he has views that are censored. Saying like he's a election truther. He's very strong on the Trump stuff. There's similarities between me and Charles, but I mean, he's a censored personality. He was kicked off YouTube, and he talks about forbidden topics like the election that will get you in trouble. And I don't really talk about those subjects that much when we talk about other things. But I'm saying Charles became controversial after the election, and continuing to support Trump, and specifically being like an election truther. But that sense, I saw that he had Newman, who was on Alex Jones, not Alex Jones himself, but Charles Moskowitz is actually Alex Jones adjacent. That many of the people that Charles interviews are the same people that appear on Alex Jones. So, saying he's a controversial figure in that sense, specifically his continued support for Trump and election trutherism and even COVID-19 type stuff that I don't really talk with him on that topic, but I could see like saying like in that sense, oh, like you can't talk to him, he's a toxic personality. But like, no, I mean like Duvid, God forbid, no one, no one's ever inviting Duvid, like no, like I'm not losing anything by talking to Charles, because like it's not like you don't have anywhere to set me up. It's not like Sandwich. It's not like you were going to get me a position to speak at like university or some Jewish organization. Even Jewish Voice for Peace. Even Jewish Voice for Peace would never ask Duvid to speak to them. So it's not like even like so it's not. There's really no platform that I'm losing by speaking to Charles, because I have no platform. Like I work for myself, independent, self-employed. So I really created my own platform through talking to independent media, and so that's really my only way to go. And Charles Moskowitz is a veteran, kind of like Luke Ford, like God forbid, even Les Glassman got his YouTube canceled. I'm very careful. Like I don't think my YouTube is in risk, and I continue. I might invite guests, but if I invited guests on my own channel, I would be very careful. If Charles, even for his new book, like I probably will not invite Charles on my YouTube channel to talk about his new book, because it's in relationship to Trump type topics that might put my channel at risk. So in terms of like my own YouTube channel, I'm very careful. I don't host controversial content on my channel. I don't have debates on my channel like that. And I don't want to put my YouTube channel at risk, although I did back myself up on Odyssey. If there was a venue like if Brundlefly wanted to return, I would consider streaming to alternative platforms. So like like that, like so that can content. I'll speak to anybody. Like I'll speak to counter Semites. I'll speak to anybody, really, anybody who's historically there's nobody who's reached out to speak to Duvid who I've said no to. And like a lot of the people like Duvid has spoke to controversial people is because they reached out to speak to me and I said yes. So in that venue, every single person who has reached out to me and asked to speak to me, I have said yes. I've been willing to come on their platform. Even that guy who was in the chat earlier, Wes, who was kind of like trolling me, attacking me, even him I agreed to speak to on his channel. And saying like, I mean, Charles Moskowitz, obviously the author of 20 books, an educated person. He's interviewed many mainstream personalities, Alan Dershowitz, Noam Chomsky, interviewed major politicians. He ran for Congress and got 60,000 votes. The current climate. He didn't really take my advice about streaming, and I'm not sure that he's going to make a comeback or everything that he's doing is working to get himself out there. He's not very interactive. But as long as he wants to keep on talking, we'll probably keep on talking. So, but he plans on switching to 8 o'clock at night. So, if he does, I'll probably talk to him again weekly. At night, and Duvid coast to coast. Luke Ford, if he comes back to LA, like Duvid coast to coast. So you find Duvid in the South, in New Orleans with John Wolfe, Duvid in Boston with Charles Moskowitz, Duvid in Hollywood with Luke Ford, Jennifer in Canada and the other side of the globe. Duvid is global. London, a regular, Claire and Zobita. Jai Devi in Australia and India, Arjun in New Zealand. So, thank God Duvid is a international personality through streaming. My subs keep on going up. Like when I first started doing this, if I wasn't hitting like 100, um, like a certain, like, I mean, if people donated money or, got more positive feedback or interview requests, I would probably stream more. But, enough people are listening, enough positive feedback that I'm, going to continue to stream. I see on my, YouTube analytics, so the view count, my Freemasonry video is definitely the best viewership of any of these library. I'll probably also go back to Freemasonry. I know a lot about the topic. There's probably a lot of demand on the topic. Almost 200 view hours on that and 500 views. All of my tour of my library, besides the civil engineering, maybe the math books have got over 50 view hours. Some of them are approaching 100 view hours, which means that 20 to 30 people have watched these all the way through. So, like, even this one, last night's one, that's you're going for 2-3 hours, to see that tens of people watch these all the way through. Maybe 100 people click on these, look at a few minutes. So I think I could grow this if I keep on doing it. I know the ADL people, but I don't know if I'm friendly with them. That's what I say. They don't really like me. Like I said, like, no mainstream Jewish organization, no synagogue has ever asked Duvid to be a speaker there. So the downtown synagogue, I spoke there, and like the first thing they did once they got a rabbi was to never have Duvid speak there again. So like when they were building up and there was no one else speaking there, like literally, like they had nobody, Duvid spoke there maybe even tens of times. But like once they had a rabbi, like the first thing they did was like no more Duvid. Like my local, no synagogue, God forbid. Jennifer, so in Australia also, God bless, good to hear that. So, but I mean, so yeah, I appreciate feedback. I appreciate people like my content. And as long as there's, reasonable audience, I'm going to keep on doing it. I think I could grow my audience. I think, for my own topics, that eventually these, the tour of my library, for like the people who've been following Duvid and follow my work, this just kind of to show myself, my library, my research, and my credibility. Because like, okay, like Samish is a professor, he's got more professional credibility than me. Like I have a bachelor's degree. I went to good yeshivas, but I studied under big rabbi. I don't really have any credibility. So I put my credibility out there. Like I read these books. That's my credibility. I've thought about these topics. I did a lot of research. I went to serve some big rabbis. So I'll put out there like these tour my libraries, my credibility. And once I'm done with these, well, I'm in Metro Detroit. Like, I mean, one thing they're not big, like Haredim and Hasidim are not big on filming. So, like if I went to like Brooklyn, like I haven't thought like, like if I went to New York, I don't even know if like I would be able to do like streams there. So if I did like a week in New York, I don't know if I'd live stream. Like generally Orthodox Jews are not so friendly to cameras or video. So New Square like that, even Metro Detroit, like local synagogues are not that friendly to streaming. So like some larger public events, like Duvid's the only one that streamed a lot of the so IRL streaming. I'm going to continue with the engineering conferences. I don't know if there's any engineering conferences. There might not be any another one for like another 4 months if the Siemens conference comes back this year. That's usually like in March. I'm also hoping to go to Italy in May. And, I said like Jennifer, maybe I would meet Jennifer in Italy for the Science of Consciousness conference. But any real Duvidians out there, the Science of Consciousness conference, Hamarov, this year is in May in Sicily. So any real Duvidians out there, we could get together in Italy at the Science of Consciousness conference. So we'll talk about that, next year. Oliver, good Yom Tov, happy Hanukkah coming up. John, I'm willing to work together to build up Mob Talk, but I think you got to start putting some more work into it. if you want to build up your show, you got to put work into it. You got to invest in better equipment, and then you got to start doing research, like to actually have stuff to talk about. Like it takes research. So it's like Duvid, like gotta so I have something to talk about research. Like like Jay Dyer says, like I read the book, so you don't have to. And like Jay Dyer has a PhD, but Max, yeah, I don't know Matthew Raphael Johnson. I would speak to Lee Cole. Like that's probably better for John Wolf's channel for Mob Talk. I mean, I might have him interview on my channel, especially as like an author. If someone wrote a book, maybe like Scott Bernstein, I could reach out to. I have Scott Bernstein's book somewhere on Detroit Mafia. Let's look at this. Yeah, Scott Bernstein, The Detroit Crime Chronicles. I also have a whole shelf on Michigan Detroit books. So and I have a whole shelf of music books and art books. So I could really keep the tour of my library books. But yeah, maybe I'll reach out to Scott Bernstein, interview on my channel as like an author interview. I don't know if Lee Cole, but no, I mean, John, you got to get your act together and you make yourself a viable streaming channel where you could have guests, be more serious, invest in some equipment, make a studio, and have good sound quality, and then for start inviting guests. You could have them on Mob Talk Monday. We could do it like Scott Bernstein, the original Gangsters, and his partner. We could do that like Mob Talk Mondays, start inviting guests. So hopefully, John, God bless, hope your mother's doing well, but you get your act together, and hopefully we could turn Mob Talk Monday into a show and start having guests, and you could reach out and so I'm going to look into possibly inviting guests if a regular Duvid watcher has an idea for a guest and wants to reach out and set it up. I would do that. Tracy Tobin, I'm not sure who she is, but yeah, anyone could come on and want to talk on Mob Talk Monday. But it's just a viewer. So if it's just a viewer who wants to share some thoughts, it might also have boomer tech, poor sound quality. But yeah, I don't mind that any viewer who wants to come on, but talk about someone that has a YouTube channel that's in the genre or somebody even a bigger platform. So but yeah, so let's try to do that. So yeah, I saw Tracy Tobin in the chat on the comments on that. So I'm going to sign off. So happy Hanukkah. Tuesday, if you want to put Mob Talk Monday for 4:00 instead of 2:00, I'm not sure my schedule. I don't know Monday if Hanukkah, so maybe Sunday for your weekend review. We'll look at that because if it's better 2:00 or 4:00, or I may have some busy need to cancel for Hanukkah. Hopefully, John Wolf is going to also try to stream some Hanukkah stuff also. So I'm going to sign off. I'm going to eat dinner. Samish, John, Truth, everybody, happy Hanukkah. Thanks for tuning in. And we'll see you next week for Hanukkah. Just Max saying Dr. Johnson, Orthodox nationalist. I'm not familiar if he has a book or something. You put like a comment on the video. I'm going to end right now. So you put a comment with his name and like his book or something. I'll look it up. But I mean, if it's interesting, you want to set it up. I'll talk to anybody. I'm not sure if like, the sense that I have to have on my channel, but if he wants to have me on his channel, like generally I'll talk to anybody. Like if I'm going to have him on my channel, I actually have to read his books. And if I have to buy his books, like I buy his books, I read his books, he's going to give me his books for free or something. But so we'll see time restraint or if it makes sense, like what were we going to talk about if we have some sort of overlap. But so I'm going to sign off. So if you want to put a comment on this video right when I'm done, and I'll try to look into that. So God bless. Shalom. Happy Hanukkah. Thanks for tuning in. And we'll see you next week. And your blessings to everybody. Happy Hanukkah, Jennifer. And you appreciate you sticking with me, and hope my content is a benefit to you.